Don't trust it until you show it. Works
So brothers, we settle down now. Brother Suboor is here, mashallah. This lecture will last approximately 1 hour, followed by a short Q&A. So inshallah, Salat al-Isha will be around 9:15, approximately, depending how many questions you brothers want to ask. So if you settle down, inshallah, and I'll let the brother get on, inshallah.
You guys hear me? Okay, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. I want to start off with a story, and I think this is a very interesting story, or I find it interesting anyway, maybe you guys fall asleep. But a few years ago I was working in High Wycombe, and when I finished work I went over to these things called internet cafes. I don't know if we still have them here. And when I went to this internet cafe after work, back then, what we used to do was, we used to go and check our emails and do these sort of things, because we didn't really have internet on our phones in those days. So when I finished work, and this was an internet cafe which had, a gaming section, and there was, people sitting around there using computers and stuff like that. So I used to go here after work, and one day I decided, let me, I wanted to speak to the guy about Islam. So there was a nice guy, a nice English guy who was in that gaming shop, in that internet cafe. And after work, once I finished and I spoke to him, and I said to him, do you believe in God? And he said, I believe in science. And the way he said it was so religious, it almost felt like I was looking into the eyes of a Pentecostal Christian that about to do breakdancing. He was so focused. But I want you to consider something, brothers and sisters. I want you to consider, imagine if I say to you, my brother over there with the brown hood, imagine I say to you, can you come over to my house for a dawah for food? And you reply back, sorry mate, I don't really like stamp collecting. You're going to confuse me, because I just invited you to my house for a dawah, and your reply was, sorry, I don't like stamp collecting. Inshallah, by the end of this presentation, what I'm hoping to show you guys is how ridiculous a reply it is when you ask someone, do you believe in God? And they reply back with, I believe in science, or I believe in evolution. It's a disconnect. It's actually not even an answer. Now, what I want to do in the beginning of this talk is actually talk about something that Muslims love, which is meat. But I'm not going to talk about meat which is dead. I'm going to talk about meat which is alive. I'm going to talk about sheep. Now, sheep are amazing creatures, because what you can actually do is you can get them very, very organized, even in a slaughterhouse. So all you got to do is put them in a line, and as long as the sheep sees the backside of another sheep, it just keeps following it, and you just have these sort of things in these slaughterhouses where these curtain or these walls come up, and you slaughter that sheep, and the next one comes, and the next one comes. Anyway, So they did this study with sheep, and unsurprisingly, if there's a whole bunch of sheep, say in this room, and 5% of the sheep head in one direction, what happens to the rest of the 95%? Yes, young man? They follow them. Fantastic. Now, they actually did this study at the University of Leeds, but with humans, Homo sapiens, us. And guess what percentage we need as human beings if we're all in this room and walking around like lemmings, and 5% go in one direction, 95% follow them even though they don't know where they're going. This is actually observed. And why this is important is because most human beings, they don't actually think. They don't actually reflect. Now, what's the name of this mosque? Masjid. What does that mean? Strangers. Now, what I want to do is, I want to talk about being strange. Being strange is when you decide not to be a sheep. When you decide, you know what? There's a whole movement towards science and atheism and secularism and feminism and Lady Gaga, but you know what? I'm not going to head that way. I'm going to use my mind. I'm going to think about it. Now, we know the Prophet ﷺ said, indeed, Islam began as something strange, and it will return to being strange just as it began. So glad tidings of paradise be for the strangers. What I want us to understand is this. Being strange is a good thing. And being strange in today's society is actually using your reason. Now, I just want to clarify something, right? Just because you have somebody who's an atheist YouTuber, an atheist professor, or some guy who's talking about whatever, chances are, and I'm going by, experience here, chances are when he's talking about science or evolution or Big Bang or any of these things, it's actually a label for something they don't actually know. And trust me, I've tried this out again and again. I've tried this out in Speaker's Corner, at universities, talking to many, many different people from many, many different backgrounds. You ask someone a question. You say, for example, you say to them, right, so how do you think us as human beings, how do you think we came about? And somebody will say, well, millions of years ago, there was this and this and this. And then all you got to do is this. You've got to first realize, hang on, that's a script. And all you have to do is to break the rhythm. All you have to do is simply say, so how did that happen? Or what's the meaning of this? And what you're going to get is, I'm not kidding. People are sheep. And this is within even the atheist community. Human beings generally don't think, they just follow authority. Now, what I wanted to do was this. Before, when I was praying Maghrib, I looked back here, and it actually had something I disagreed with, right? So I wanted to make that clear. On this poster it says, all your doubts cleared. All your doubts cleared. The reason why I disagree with that is because that's not the purpose of my talk. I haven't come here to try and clarify any doubts. I've come here because I believe Islam is the truth, and I believe the promise of Allah is true. And interestingly, that is actually the verse which was mentioned, the verse about the promise of Allah in Maghrib today. Allah says in the Quran in chapter 48, verse 42, it is He who sent His messenger with guidance in the religion of truth to manifest it over all religion. And sufficient is Allah as a witness. Allah makes this promise 3 times in the Quran. What does Allah say in the Quran? Allah says that His messenger and the deen of Islam is going to prevail. It's going to prevail over every single worldview, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Taoism, Buddhism, atheism, feminism, Meminism, or alien beliefs. Whatever it is, Islam is going to intellectually conquer every single ideology. So the purpose of my talk today is not to clarify doubts, but the purpose of my talk today is, by the end of it, all of you understand that, of course, we all know that this deen will prevail, and we do not say inshallah to that, but you'll understand how to deal with one segment of society. And this segment of society is known as, or the religion is known as evolutionary humanism. Now what I want to do is I want to mention someone who I think is very interesting. There was an English biologist, a philosopher who existed in the early part of the 20th century. His name was Julian Huxley. Julian Huxley, in 1927, he wrote a book called Religion Without Revelation. A very interesting title. Religion Without Revelation. Now, Julian Huxley, he was a militant atheist, he hated religion, and he wanted the world to disbelieve in God. So he wrote this book called Religion Without Revelation, and he believed the way to indoctrinate all of us here is through the education system. And through the education system, to prime us into thinking that science is the way of looking at the world. Interestingly, that's what people believe now. And that Darwinian evolution is actually true, and we should actually believe that. And that we should be humanists. Interesting, because that's what's going on. This is 1927. Now, Julian Huxley wasn't a biologist who was working in his mom's basement. He was actually very important. He was one of the main figures in evolutionary biology in the beginning of the 20th century. In fact, if you speak to any evolutionary professor, he will know of Julian Huxley. And what did Julian Huxley believe? He believed they needed to indoctrinate the world through the education system. What vehicle did he have to promote this religion? The religion which he called evolutionary humanism. He was the first president of UNESCO. Anybody heard of UNESCO? United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization. He was actually the founder of UNESCO. An interesting position if you want to influence not only the education system in this country, but the education system in every single country in the world. Because this is a United Nations position. So what I want us to understand is this. Before we speak about evolution, we are not just dealing with a scientific theory. We are actually dealing with an ideology. Now, we are told in the Quran many times we are told to use our reason, to use our mind, to reflect, to think. Allah says, in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of night and day, there are signs for those with intelligence. So the Quran is giving us a polar opposite, a diametrically opposite message to that of Julian Huxley. It is telling us nature is actually a sign of the divine. Now what I want to do in this lecture is I want to pit those two worldviews together. I want to pit together the Islamic worldview and the view of Julian Huxley and see which one is actually correct. And what I'm going to be basically covering in today's talk is this. Does evolution undermine God? And I have two answers for that. And these answers are going to really help you understand this topic really well. And I can summarize it in the following way. Does evolution undermine God? Yes, no. Both are actually correct. Who's confused? Raise your hand if you're confused. Only a few people, so the rest of you don't mind me saying that, does evolution undermine God? The answer is yes and no. So let me just clarify that a little bit. Evolution does undermine the existence of God if you have a popular understanding of science, if you have a popular understanding of evolutionary theory. Evolution does not undermine God if you actually have an academic understanding of science and evolution. Does everyone get the difference? So if you just have a surface level understanding, a very superficial understanding, a sheepish understanding if you like, then yes, you will say this undermines God. But if you have an academic understanding, you will understand it actually doesn't. And I'm going to cover three basic points. Firstly, science is not the only root of knowledge. Secondly, science doesn't lead to absolute certainty, and science doesn't undermine God. So let's cover the first point. Is science the only root of knowledge? Remember that conversation I had with the guy at the beginning? I believe in science, okay? And this isn't just his view, this is a view which is held by millions of people across the world. So, how many people in this room believe in Genghis Khan, that Genghis Khan existed? Okay. Right, what evidence do you have for the existence of Genghis Khan? History, essentially. Okay, where's his grave?
Iraq.
In what? This one say Iraq. His grave must be in Iraq. His grave is supposed to be in Mongolia. Interestingly, the legend says, and no one knows where his grave is, that he was actually buried in a secret location, and then the people who buried him were actually executed, so they can't actually find his location. So no one actually has access to his grave. Do we have access to his DNA? No. Do we have a photograph of him existing in whatever couple of hundred years ago he existed? No. So how do we know he existed? Is it rational to believe that Genghis Khan existed? Is it rational to believe that Plato existed? Is it rational to believe that Isaac Newton existed? But none of these things can be explained using science. We're actually using something known as testimony. Testimony. That many different groups of people who are reliable are coming back and saying, this is what happened. Do we have that in our tradition? Do we have the isnad? Do we have this? Or is testimony? Testimony accounts for, and I'm hoping one of the youngsters is going to ask me a question about this, because I'm going to make a very bold claim. 99.999% of your beliefs that you hold in your brain right now, if I was to get my brother over here with the purple shirt, and if I was to split his head in half in a halal way, and if I was to study his beliefs, 99.999% of his beliefs are going to be testimonial. Are going to be testimonial. For example, my brother, do you believe in the country called Madagascar? Okay, forget the film. It's a country, Madagascar, right? So Madagascar, have you been to Madagascar? No. So how do we know it exists? Someone can say, I've seen it on a map. Someone can just draw anything on a map. I've seen pictures of it. Well, that could be Siberia. How do you know? It's testimony. The majority of human beliefs are testimony. Even if I was to say, okay, there is a scientific theory called the Big Bang. Raise your hands if you believe there is such a theory in science. Not if you believe in it, if you believe this theory exists. Okay. Have you done the experiments yourself? No. It's the testimony of scientists. So majority of human beliefs are actually testimonial. So science is not the only root of knowledge. Okay, let's look at something else. Mathematics. Without mathematics, we have nothing. Okay? Physics breaks down, biology breaks down to chemistry, chemistry breaks down to physics, physics breaks down to mathematics. Okay, excellent. Now mathematics. Can you solve a mathematical equation using science? 1 + 1 is 2. Can you prove that using science? No. That's pure logic. That's maths. That's not something you can use science to. Science is based upon logic and based upon maths. It can't actually do that. So for example, let me give you some logic here. For the assumption, for the purposes of the exercise, go along with me. Assuming I'm a human, so Suboor is a human. Humans are made of cells, therefore Suboor is made of cells. That's logic. Can you prove that logic using science?
Yeah.
Really? I'm talking about the logical flow here.
Oh, right.
That you go from premise to conclusion. That logical flow is nothing to do with science. It's just pure logic. Also, you know this whole thing of, I believe in science, I believe in a scientific worldview. Okay. So, imagine if you see a small orphan girl from, say, China, and this small orphan girl is going through some rubbish, and she's picking up litter, and she's finding some form of food to eat. Imagine you are shown a video of that, and you actually have footage of this girl or you actually go down to the dump where she actually lives in some part of China where she's going through rubbish, can you actually measure the moral responsibilities of helping that girl? Can you measure right and wrong? Is it right to help her? Or is it wrong to help her? Human beings are driven by morals. We're driven by what's right and wrong. We're driven by justice. But can you put justice in a test tube? Can you see goodness and wrongness through a telescope? Of course you can't. But human societies are driven by what? Morality. Even, sadly, world wars are driven by supposed injustice. So can you measure injustice using science? Again, you can't. Lastly, metaphysics. What I mean by metaphysics is things that we all will believe, even though we haven't really thought about them. So, for example, I believe that the young brother over there has a mind, that he is actually a person with independent reasoning. That is not something you can prove scientifically. That is not something physical. That's just an assumption about the world. Likewise, there's many things about the world, metaphysical truths, which cannot be proven by science. So science, just to summarize, cannot prove testimony, it's based on testimony. It cannot solve mathematical equations, it's based on mathematical equations. It cannot solve logical problems, it's based on logical problems. And it's also based on metaphysical truths. So science is not the only way of looking at the world. Why this is important is because we as Muslims believe there's many different ways of looking at the world. And even if you're not Muslim, you will realize this also. We don't just believe that science is a way of looking at the world. We believe reason itself, just using your akal, just using your reason, just using your mind, is a way of looking at the world. Observation, using your senses. Self-evident truths. Some things, like for example, I know that I can trust my mind. I know that your mind is trustworthy. That's not something you can actually prove using science. You have to assume that in the beginning. Introspection, and lastly what I want to speak about is this, fitrah. We have a first principle. The first principle that we have is the fitrah. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, every child is born upon the fitrah. And their society turns them either into a Christian, a Jew, or a Zoroaster, or whatever. So we believe in that as a first principle. Other people have other first principles. We can carry that conversation on during Q&A. Okay, the second section. Science can never undermine God. Evolutionary biology can never undermine God. Let me give you a simple example. So, I have this mobile phone. This mobile phone, I can explain how this mobile phone works. I can explain how it's connected to satellites. I can explain how the electronics work. I can explain that it functions in this particular way. It has this hardware, it has this software. You know, I've got whatever, you know, games on there. I can explain the how of how this mobile phone functions, how it was built, and so on and so forth. If I can explain how it works, does that mean there is no designer? Think about that. If I explain how something works, does that mean there's no designer? If I explain how your car works, how the wheels spin, how you have the axials and you have the gears and you have the petrol going in and combustion and all the rest, does that mean I can turn around and say, therefore no one designed your car? Because I can explain how it works. It doesn't flow. Likewise, science is an attempt to explain how the world works. It's an attempt to explain how the world works. It doesn't explain why it exists in the first place. So how and why is a category mistake when someone says, I believe in science, so therefore I don't believe in God. Okay. I just want to mention some very interesting things here, right? Anyone heard of the book called Sapiens? It's a very popular evolutionary book. They have it at I saw it at the airport. You know, they have these big posters. They're promoting it everywhere. It's by an evolutionary biologist called Yuval Noah Harari. He's an atheist evolutionary biologist. Just want you to consider something. Because remember, these people are science popularizers. These aren't the mainstream academics. These are science popularizers. And an academic understanding of science will show you that it doesn't undermine God. But these are the popularizers. These are the guys at the front. But look what he says in his book. There are no gods in the universe, no nations, no money.
no human rights, no laws, and no justice outside the common imagination of human beings. Is that even a scientific statement? No, it's not a scientific statement. Yet it's in a science book written by a scientist. Let's look at what Julian Huxley, remember the guy I was talking about at the beginning in Religion Without Revelation, the militant atheist who wanted to convert the world to evolutionary humanism, which he believed was a religion without revelation. This is what he said. It will soon be impossible for an intelligent, educated man or woman to believe in a God as it is now to believe the earth is flat. Again, this is an evolutionary biologist who's holding a very prestigious position, the founder and the president of UNESCO, and this is what he has to say. Also, our good old friend Richard Dawkins, in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, he says something very interesting, and I just want you to reflect about this. Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually satisfied atheist. Just think about that. Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually satisfied atheist. Why that's interesting is because Darwin was never an atheist. And Darwin was never intellectually satisfied. And all the way to the end of his life, Darwin was confused about God, but he explicitly said, in my wildest fluctuations, I've never been an atheist. And his reasons, and it's quite interesting if you actually look at his life. He started off as a Christian, he moved into deism. Deism is the idea there's a God, but there's no religion. Later on in life, and by the way, when did he publish The Origin of Species? 1859. Was he a believer in God in 1859? Yes, he was. Even after he published The Origin of Species, he became an agnostic in the last decade of his life, according to Michael Roos, a historian of science. And he became an agnostic because of the problem of evil and suffering. It was not to do with his evolutionary theory. So he was never, so if you go back to him and you say to him, so Mr. Charles Darwin, about 150 years after your death, a book is going to come out and the book is going to say, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually satisfied atheist. Charles Darwin would say, well, that's news for me because I was never one. Now, it's very interesting. These are his private correspondence that he actually has with people. In one of them, he actually says, it seems to me absurd to doubt that a man can be an ardent theist and an evolutionist. So he never saw a contradiction between the two. Like I mentioned before, these particular people I was mentioning, these are the popularizers. But if you go to the mainstream academic understanding of the philosophy of science, of the philosophy of evolutionary biology, you will not find statements like this. They will not make statements like this, because these are the people who are the popularizers, and these are the people who are misrepresenting the way that science is done. This is what an atheist philosopher of evolutionary biology, who is a mainstream academic, actually has to say. So he is mentioning things from an academic perspective, not from a personal perspective. What he basically says is this: the theory of evolution does not rule out deism, the thesis that God starts the universe in motion and forever after declines to intervene, but the theory does not also rule out a more active God whose intervention into nature fly under the radar of evolutionary biology. So this is the mainstream understanding of the philosophy of science and evolutionary biology. Ignore the popularizers, ignore the guys with the loudspeakers. Academically, this is what they actually believe. The evolutionary biologist Scott Todd, again a very important evolutionary biologist, this is what he has to say. Again, these are not household figures, as in people don't know about them, but this is mainstream academia. Again, he's also an atheist. Even if all the data points to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it's not naturalistic. That's something you can talk about in the Q&A. Of course, the scientist as an individual is free to embrace a reality that transcends naturalism. What he's basically saying there is, in science, we assume there's no God. This is known as methodological naturalism. This is not something they can prove, this is just an assumption they actually have. And what he says is, it doesn't matter if all the data points towards God, we're not going to say God. But he goes on to say that that doesn't mean that there is no God. There's a difference between these two types of things. The last thing which I want to cover is science leading to certainty. Now, my daughter, she watches Postman Pat, and sometimes when I'm sitting there working on my laptop, it's on in the background, and I'm forced to listen to, you know, him talking about whatever, and then there's this cat always going off in the background. Now, there's one part of Postman Pat that I thought, what the hell is going on here? What are they trying to do? There's a child in Postman Pat who's like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you scientific proof. And I was like, scientific proof? What are they doing? They're using these terms like scientific proof. And what I want to show you guys is this propaganda to prime our minds to believe that science leads to certainty, it begins off in childhood. It really does. That's just one program. There's also other children's programs that they put in this type of language. They want the public to see, they want the public to understand that science is the same thing as logic, science is the same thing as common sense, science is the same thing as rationality, science is the same thing as anything, right? Science is a particular method with a particular scope which gives you particular results for a segment of society. It's not something that leads to absolute certainty, and this is again the academic view. So let me just explain a few basic concepts. Firstly, the idea of scientific proof. Scientists have a big responsibility, and that responsibility is to educate the public on the misunderstanding that they actually have about science. And the people who are best placed to do this are the people who are known as philosophers of science. Philosophers of science are the people who study science and they look at how it comes to conclusions. So in Postman Pat and on YouTube and in sometimes at university and other places, they use the term scientific proof. But I just want you to consider what philosophers of science actually say about this particular word. This is a basic book on the philosophy of science. This is not some academic book, this is just a basic book, a new introduction published by Oxford University, by Oxford University Press, by the philosophers of science Gillian Barker and Philip Kitcher, who are atheists. Science is revisable, hence to talk about scientific proof is dangerous, because the term fosters the idea of conclusions that are graven in stone. So obviously Postman Pat's gone off the rails here. This priming that's done of children, this priming that's done of us, that science leads to certainty, is something which is going to take quite a bit of effort to actually unravel. But this is something which is the mainstream view in the philosophy of science, that science doesn't lead to certainty. So why do mainstream philosophers of science believe that science doesn't lead to certainty? We just have to go back to the basics. How does science actually operate? The first thing is science operates under an assumption. Not under a prediction, not under a proof, but under an assumption. And the assumption is, whatever we study in the world, we are going to assume there's no God, there's no jinn, there's no ghost, there's nothing supernatural. That's just an assumption they make. Secondly, it's based on something known as the problem of induction. What that basically means is this. I'm a scientist in Wales and I want to study sheep. I don't know why sheep keep coming up in my presentation, probably some subconscious thing in my mind. So, I'm a scientist in Wales and I'm studying sheep. And I decide, right, so I want to find out what colour sheep are. So I look at sheep and I say, hey, that sheep's white, hey, that sheep's white, that one's white too, that one's white too. I notice 1,000 sheep which are white. So I make a conclusion that all sheep are white. So I've gone from a limited set of data to a general conclusion all sheep are white. But one day I may come across a black sheep, which will challenge my hypothesis, my theory that all sheep are white. This is known as the problem of induction. This is a very well-known problem in the philosophy of science. You can always get a new piece of data which can challenge your previous theory or challenge your previous observations. Another problem is the problem known as underdetermination. What that basically means is this: the same data can be used to make different conclusions. Interestingly enough, The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin, when he goes into his theory, before he actually speaks about why his theory is true, he makes a very interesting philosophical point about science. He says, there are facts in my book from which I derived my theory. But you can use the same facts which are in my book to derive an alternative theory. And to really weigh out which theory is correct is going to take more than my book. Now, I'm not saying Charles Darwin didn't believe in his theory. He actually did. What I'm saying is, he understood the same data can give rise to alternative theories. But if we're taught science leads to certainty, then obviously that doesn't make any sense. I want us to conceptualize something. So, we had this amazing model of the universe known as the Newtonian model. The Newtonian model worked well for how long? Anyone know? Over 200 years. 200 years we had a really powerful scientific model, the Newtonian model. This model, you could make a prediction, right, where is this planet going to be in 5 years from now on this particular day? You'd make a calculation based upon the Newtonian model, wait 5 years for that particular day, and it would be there. That's how powerful this actual model was. This was the model that Isaac Newton put together. Einstein came along in the beginning of the 20th century, and he totally shattered this model. And he replaced it with a new model known as general relativity, the Einsteinian model. What's interesting is, he flipped everything upside down. So, remember the famous story of, the apple falling down and gravity, right? Isaac Newton, that's how he discovered gravity. Well, it's actually false. I just thought I'd mention that. So he thought, the way Isaac Newton thought gravity works is, you have objects just being pulled down. Einstein came along and said, actually no, it's the other way around. It's actually space-time curvature which is creating this pushing effect. The definition of mass, which was being used to make all these calculations which were coming true, Einstein came along and he changed even the definition of mass. According to Isaac Newton, time and space are fixed, and Einstein gave us a very complicated idea, a very counterintuitive idea, that time and space is like cloth, it's dynamic, it keeps changing. So, something that worked well for over 200 years and made predictions and helped us go to the moon. If you don't believe we went to the moon, that's a different matter, but let's assume we did. That was based upon Newtonian mechanics. That was based upon, if you like, the Newtonian model. But Einstein showed us that it wasn't true in the absolute sense. We also have things in, for example, chemistry. We have nitrogen. So, you are all, mashallah, pious people, so you've never heard of this film called The Fast and the Furious, but there's this film called The Fast and the Furious. These people, they make these sinful films. And in this film, they're using nitrogen boosters, or these types of things, right? Now, nitrogen boosters makes cars go really, really fast. How was nitrogen discovered? Nitrogen was discovered using the theory of phlogiston. The theory of phlogiston helped us discover nitrogen. But phlogiston turned out to be a false theory. So even false theories can give rise to new data. Now there's a bit of a confusion I want to clarify. Science is not observations. So if someone says, yeah, science is true because we know the shape of the earth is not going to change. You'd need some medication there, mate. Seriously. Science is not observations. Science is when you take observations and you make a theory. Observations are observations, and observations don't actually change. Now this is what it says in, again, an Oxford University publication on the philosophy of science. Historically, there are cases of many theories that we now believe to be false that were empirically quite successful. So you can have successful theories which turn out to be false. So we have this PR problem. We have this popular understanding of science, which is it leads to certainty, and the academic understanding, which is it gives you workable models which can then be changed. It doesn't lead to absolute certainty. Nothing in science is absolute certain from a theoretical perspective. Something else also to consider is this. Even today, we have theories in physics which are taught at university, but which both can't be true. We have the theory of general relativity, like we spoke about before, and we have the theory of quantum mechanics. Both of these theories are taught at university, but they both contradict each other. So science, even when it contradicts other theories, can still be taught at a university level. So this gives us a very powerful conceptual point. And the powerful conceptual point is, if there's a scientific theory, past, present, future, which contradicts the Quran, there's no reason to panic and hide under a table in a fetal position. All you need to do is this. You simply need to do an epistemic way. You need to say, okay, we believe the Quran is a miracle because of X, Y, Z. Science is the knowledge of speculation. So if there's a conflict, we can accept this as a working model, whether it's Darwinian evolution, whether it's whatever, but we don't have to accept it to be true. And a really powerful conceptual point to think about is the static state model. The static state model was the model which existed before the Big Bang, before the 1950s and 60s. The static state model said the universe has no beginning. Right. Question time. Does that contradict the Quran?
Yes.
One person? Does that contradict the Quran?
Yes.
What does the Quran say? Universe has a beginning or no? Yes. Good for you. Manhaj, you're on the manhaj, mashallah. So, the Quran says the universe has a beginning. Scientists at that particular time, 1950s, 60s, 40s, 30s, 20s, they said the universe has no beginning. Okay. How much ikhtilaf was there amongst the physicists at that time? Ikhtilaf meaning disagreement. How much? None. They all said, it was a consensus, they all said the universe has no beginning. There was no alternative theory, there was no whatever. Einstein, he believed in it. Niels Bohr, he believed in it. Lord Kelvin, whatever. They all believed, well, you shouldn't use the word Lord, Kelvin, right? They all believed that the universe has no beginning, because that was the model, static state model. And they had scientific evidences for that. Remember, scientific evidences aren't absolute, they're inferences. Now what happened? Late 40s, 50s, 60s, they got evidence for a new model, which is known as the Big Bang model, which says the universe had a beginning. So is it in line with the Quran now? Yes, it is. But 50 years from now, they may go back to a type of static state model. This is just the way that science works. Again, another conceptual point. Beginning of the 20th century, whether you're speaking to Einstein, Niels Bohr, whoever, these guys, ask them something. Is the sun stationary? Is it fixed in one location? Every single astronomer, every single physicist would have given you one answer. Yes. The sun is stationary at the center of the solar system and it doesn't move an inch. What does the Quran say about the sun? Ooh, contradiction. Right, is it time to become murtad or are we going to have a fight? We're going to say, okay, fine, you have some evidences for this, we have some observations, we have the Quran, so let's do an epistemic way. We have the knowledge of speculation, we have science which is based upon this assumption and is based upon these inferences. Okay, it's contradicting the Quran. We can accept it as a valid scientific model, but we don't have to accept it to be true, and we'll wait. After we use powerful telescopes to look further into the universe, we discovered the sun does actually have an orbit around the Milky Way galaxy, and it also rotates. So no need to, run away from that. No need to change the religion because we found something in science. Do you guys get the point?
No.
Evolutionary theory has a lot of things which can go in line with Islam, some things which don't. But if something in science is contradicting the Quran, I mean, it's not such a big deal. This is a very, very important point to actually take away. Now, what I'd like to end upon is this. Then I'll leave more time for the Q&A because, I'm sure you guys have some questions. So, from a university level, school level, YouTube level, social media level, professor level, popular books level, we are taught Darwinian evolution is a fact. is true. It's as true as the shape of the earth. They'll use statistics like 99% of biologists believe in Darwinian evolution. Again, like I said in the beginning, we're not sheep, we're strangers. And what do strangers do? They ask strange questions. What strange questions do they ask? What do you mean by that? What do you mean they believe? Here is a challenge. We are told on a popular level that Darwinian evolution is certain, absolute, true as the shape of the earth. Academically, you can ask any philosopher of science or any mainstream academic who's an evolutionary biologist, whether an atheist, Christian, Jew, Lady Gaga, whoever. Ask them a simple question. Ask them, is Darwinian evolution based on a probabilistic framework? Is Darwinian evolution based upon multiple assumptions? Is Darwinian evolution a field in which we have conceptual, philosophical and scientific disputes within academia? They can't deny these three things. Trust me, try it out. They cannot deny these three things. I had a discussion with an evolutionary professor a few weeks ago, and he's a mainstream academic. He's not like, Richard Dawkins and these popularizers. And we had this discussion, and I made a very simple point, that evolutionary biology, Darwinian evolution, is based on a probabilistic framework. There are assumptions, and there are conceptual and scientific disputes. He didn't disagree with that. Why would he disagree with that? Who would disagree with that is people that want you to believe that it is absolutely certain. So when they say 99% of evolutionary biologists believe in it, all you need to say is, do they believe it's absolutely true, or do they believe it's a valid scientific theory which has which is based on a probabilistic framework, which has assumptions, which has disputes? That's all you need to do. And I want to focus on something right now that I began off with. I think Sheikh Abdul Qadir is going to take off all your doubts clear next year. And probably not going to invite me either. I'll get 80 to get, I'll come in, man. You can't stop me, inshallah. But what I want to start off, what I want to end up on is this. It's not about doubt, it's not about clearing your doubts. Believers don't have doubts. We do not have doubts about something so trivial, honestly. Look, let me just give you guys something to think about. I get contacted by many Muslims who say, yeah, brother, I'm having this doubt. I'm like, you're having this doubt. I'm going, what's the doubt about? Oh, this and that. And I'll give you a live example. A live example of somebody who was having supposed doubts. So he's one of these Instagram brothers, those mashallah beards that look like they've been chiseled, right? And that's his WhatsApp. So he WhatsApps me, and he says to me, bro, my man's gone, my man's on the floor, I read this article, and I say, go on, what article did you read? I just want you to consider something, right? I'm doing postgraduate study in the philosophy of science, right? This guy sends me a philosophical article which I would find very difficult to read, and it'll take me a long time, and possibly I'll have to sit with someone. And he sends me this article, and then he's claiming he's having doubts. He says, my man's on the floor, I read this article about, free will and this and that. I said to him, did you read it? He's like, no. I was like, what do you mean you're having doubts? You haven't read it? He said, yeah, but when I was going through the article, there was like 9 premises and there was this and that, and there's all this writing. I was like, you're having doubts about something you don't even understand? I'm going to make a claim now. And the claim is this. The majority of the people that have contacted me, who have had doubts, apparently, about this topic of evolution, they don't understand anything about it. It's just sheepish behavior. I saw this video, man, and the guy was talking with so much confidence, and what he basically said is, whether you look at genetics, anatomy, psychology, physiology, biochemistry, biogeography, everything is showing Darwinian evolution is true. What's Darwinian evolution? I don't know, but the guy said it, and he said it with passion. So I'm having doubts. I'm not kidding. This is what people have reduced our religion to. Do you believe believe that this was the belief of the Sahaba, that somebody came up to them and just gave them a little, a little sentence, and they were like, oh, I don't know if I believe in Allah anymore. Come on, guys, come on. It's just silly. It's just getting silly. I'll give you another example that actually is from Hamza, not from me, but I found it really funny. This guy contacts Hamza, right, by email. He says, bro, that's it. My iman's on the floor, gone, done. I don't know what to do. My iman's gone. I'm finished. Okay, what's the problem? Oh, they discovered the God particle. They discovered the God particle. Okay. So Hamza was like, so, Akhi, let me explain to you what happened, right? Physicists were looking for this particle, and this particle was supposed to do something like give mass to other particles or something, right? Just some particle. There's many different types of particles, right? Allah is al-Latif. The universe is very complex, right? There's a particular type of particle which was postulated is supposed to give mass to other particles. Now this particle was so difficult to find, they called it the goddamn particle. God damn it. That's what they called it, the goddamn particle. And slowly that term changed from the goddamn particle to the God particle. And when they discovered the God particle, atheist sheep went online, yay, we discovered it, therefore there's no God. And Muslim sheep went, oh my God, what am I going to do? They probably broke their prayer when they heard it on the radio. Seriously, it's sheepish behavior. It's sheepish behavior. What did our Prophet, peace be upon him, teach us about ignorance? What did he teach us? The cure to ignorance is to ask. Just a few weeks or months ago, I was listening to Sheikh Abu Shuaib Bassam, and he just gave a very powerful point. He said, ignorance is an innovation. We talk about this is bid'ah, that is bid'ah. He said, ignorance is a bid'ah. And seriously, when it comes to these particular types of issues, just take the Quranic paradigm. Don't talk about what you don't know. Don't have doubts about what you don't understand from people who don't understand it. What I'd like to end upon is this, what I began off with, is the verse of the Quran, which is a verse which I remember listening to many years ago when Shaykh Ahmed that said, this is a verse which you need to remember, and this is a verse which you need to stick into your head and use this as ammunition. It is He who sent His messenger with guidance and the religion of truth to manifest it over all religion, and sufficient is Allah as a witness. And on Sunnah Online, there's an amazing article I was reading the other day. The article is actually by Sheikh Albani, in which he says, the future is for Islam. And what he basically does in this article is he puts together a whole bunch of evidences that the future is for Islam. And that we shouldn't despair, and that we shouldn't worry, and that we should understand that this is something that Allah has promised, and that we should work towards that goal. And I wanted to quote from that article because this really boosted me when I actually read it. And I read it today, and I read it some while back. And this is what the Shaykh says. There is no doubt that the future is for Islam, by the permission and favor of Allah. So I quote what I am able of these narrations and hope they will strengthen the determination of the workers of Islam and be a proof against those who are indifferent and those who have despaired. And in the Quran, when it speaks about the believing men and the disbelieving men and the disbelieving women, and the hypocritical men and the hypocritical women, they have despaired of Allah. And one of the explanations of that ayah is that they doubted that the promise of Allah, that Islam will become ghalib, that Islam will become dominant, is going to happen. And this meant that they were despairing of Allah. So what we should do is we should understand we're not here to clear doubts. We're here to create doubts in the minds of evolutionary humanists. We're here to create doubts in the minds of atheists. Just like, and I'm being honest with you, Muslims, they're so scared of evolutionary biology, they don't want to think about it in the same way atheists don't want to think about Jahannam. But there's a difference. Jahannam is real, and this stuff is probabilistic based on assumption, and you have disputes here. But there's no disputes about this. This is haqq. So what we need to do is this: we need to understand we are the workers of Islam, and before dawah there is a condition, and that condition is what? Knowledge. So you should know what you're actually talking about. Everything good I have said is from Allah. Every mistake is my own. Jazakallah khair for listening. I look forward to your questions.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Suboor. Amazing lecture. I'm sure that stimulated a lot of thought in a lot of brothers. I know when the brothers are attentive, when hardly anybody moves. So, mashallah, Jazakallah khair. What we had intended to do was take written questions, but I think the arena is such that if you do put your hand up, we will, Brother Numan.
The brother said about we have to take some of these theories as valid working models. But how do we apply that to this picture they paint of us evolving from apes?
Okay, very good question.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Numan, come on.
Okay, so the question that Brother Numan asked is, okay, so we can accept scientific theories as valid, but what do we do about things which clearly contradict Islam, like human chimpanzee history? Essentially, right? That's what you're basically asking. Now, that's a very good question, because if you accept something as valid science, it doesn't mean you have accepted it to be true. There's a difference between the two. Even atheist philosophers of science realize this. For example, there's a philosopher, David Stove. He's an atheist philosopher of science. He wrote a famous book called Darwinian Fairy Tales. So you can tell he's a critic of Darwinism. Now, he believes in evolution. There's a difference between evolution and Darwinism. Evolution means many different things. Some things can contradict Islam, some things don't. But what he says in his book is this. He's very critical of Darwinism, and he writes against it, and he speaks about all these problems with the actual theory. But in the beginning of the book, he makes it clear. He says, I still accept that this is a valid scientific model. I still accept that this is the best we have in science. So accepting it's the best doesn't mean you've accepted it to be true. So when we accept that it's a scientific, for example, I'm a Muslim in the 1940s, I accept the static state model as a valid scientific model. That doesn't mean I accept that as absolutely true. Like today, I accept the Big Bang as a valid scientific model. In 50 years from now, they might bring a new theory. So accepting it as science doesn't mean you accept it to be true. That is only the case if you believe science leads to truth, which is clearly not the case. Now, in particular, I want to speak about human chimpanzee history, and I'll talk about pigs. Why this is fun is because we are told this very simplistic understanding of human chimpanzee history. Oh, look, that's similar. A bit of similarity in the human being, a bit of similarity in the chimp. Therefore, there's common ancestry. That's what we're told. However, according to mainstream philosophers of science, human chimpanzee history is based on a probabilistic framework which has assumptions, and it's naive to say that they must have a common ancestor, because it's not a must. It's something based on a probability if certain assumptions are taken into account. So let me just explain one of the assumptions. Actually, a few of them. Firstly, you have the assumption of methodological naturalism, which is every single thing has to be explained naturally. That's not proven, that's just an assumption. 2, that similarities are due to common descent. So if there's a similarity in the genes of a human being and the genes of a chimpanzee, therefore they have a common ancestor. That's known as homology. That's an assumption. But there's a problem with that assumption, which is that we know of many similarities between human beings and other creatures, which is not due to common ancestry. For example, there's many similarities anatomically and at the genetic level between human beings and pigs, which don't exist between human beings and chimpanzees, which is a paradox. In fact, before we had synthetic insulin, we used to extract the insulin from pigs and stick it in human beings. For people who are heart patients and who need certain parts, you can actually replace certain parts of the pig's heart and stick it in a human being, and it works. It doesn't work with a chimpanzee. So that's another assumption, and that assumption is something which is misrepresented. They should say similarities are due to common descent, therefore common descent is true. That's actually circular reasoning, right? So it's an assumption, and the assumption has problems. So apart from methodological naturalism, apart from homology, there's another assumption, and that assumption is natural selection led this to that. You can show all the similarities till the sheep come home. But if you don't have a mechanism, you might as well just talk to the wall. And the thing about the Darwinian mechanism, we've been taught, and I was taught when I was in school, that this is true. This is true. Like, no being around the bush, this is true. Yet in 2016, in the Royal Society in London, which is the oldest scientific society in the world, the most prestigious in the world, where you get the brilliant minds from across the world that come from Oxford and other places, they were sitting down in a meeting, the Royal Society meeting in 2016 in November, and the main question they were asking was Darwin right in his mechanism? They're still debating that 150 years later. So that's also an assumption. So apart from methodological naturalism, apart from homology, apart from natural selection, there is also single origin. That all of life as we know it has one single origin. That's an assumption. That cannot be proven. It is simply an assumption. All we need to do, Noman Bhai, is this. We need to show the difference between the public understanding and the academic understanding. And we need to show that people have been deceived. It's very powerful psychologically when you show people that.
Do you know any books of some, scientists, of some researchers, really at university level, at the deep level, that explain to people like us that people like Richard Dawkins and stuff are pretty much saying lies? Do you understand my question or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Time for some selfless promotion. Nothing wrong with that, a bit of egoism. So we have a book, inshallah, coming out in about 2-3 months' time. It's a book written by myself and Hamza Softsis. And this book is called Failed Hypothesis, Essays on Darwinism, Evolutionists. And what we do in the book is this. We've got certain chapters on evolution, and what we do is we do not use anybody who believes in God, or Christian, or Jew, or atheist, Lady Gaga, whatever. We just use mainstream atheist philosophers of science, mainstream atheist evolutionary biologists to repeat the same thing which I said in this talk. That's what we do. So I could, someone can deny my credentials and say, well, you're just a Muslim, so you're going to say that anyway. But I'll say, actually, no, look at these guys. And these guys are mainstream representatives. And actually, they don't only agree with us, they also publicly complain about the misrepresentation of their field. So, Failed Hypothesis, look out for it. It's going to be free of charge. We only charge postage and packaging. Inshallah, it's going to be a good book.
Sorry, the quotations that you're saying, when you say mainstream, you mean not the popular scientists?
Yes.
Any other questions for Brother Suboor? Okay, Jazakallah khair, Brother Suboor, amazing, mashallah. I'm sure everybody else feels the same way as I do. I think that was a fantastic lecture with many evidences. So we're going to do Azan of Isha now, pray Isha straight away, then immediately after Isha will be the next lecture. So we request all the brothers to remain behind and benefit. Jazakumullah khair.